Welcome to Mental Wealth, the podcast to invest in your mind. Here I will help you make sense of your mind and behaviours, giving you the tools to have your best life. There is so much to share, so let's get into this episode and explore another great topic. So welcome to episode 20. And in this episode, we're going to explore imposter syndrome. It might be just a phrase that you hear, or you might really resonate with it and you might know a bit more about it. You might yourself feel that you suffer. And I think the best way to do this is to bring somebody in who has got a lot of experience in this field, both with her clients and her own life, no doubt. I can certainly say that mine too. So I would love to welcome my very special friend, Denise Chilton, as my special guest in this episode. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Alison. Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to see you.
I know.
It's always good to see you. So thanks for inviting me. Really pleased to be here today.
Brilliant. So tell everyone a little bit about you first.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm very old, so I'm not really. We'll better make this short, as it's a shortish podcast. So I'm a career life coach, leadership coach. Do a lot of work in the leadership space, and I've been doing this work for about maybe about 15 years. So when you kind of talked about imposter syndrome, it's something that comes up very often with clients that I work with, and in organisations. So I think it'd be quite nice to get underneath the surface to explore it in a bit more detail.
I think so. And I think, as is often with these topics, when we talk about it, it helps people realise that they're not on their own, that lots of people do have these issues, and we can then explore maybe some strategies. So I think it's really good for us to start with that. More than that, actually, just thinking about the fact that we're not on our own, we are alone. And I know that, Denise, you have shared with me before your thoughts on imposter syndrome and who can it affect?
Well, I think that's a really good one. I think there was some research done. I think the phrase came from some research that started out that was done on successful women. And actually, what they realised that actually, if you've got imposter syndrome, it can happen to anyone. And it happens very, very commonly to successful people. So I always say to people I'm working with, if you've got imposter syndrome, you're likely to be very successful.
It's so funny you say that, isn't it? Almost the opposite to what people think, really. They challenge themselves so much with it.
Yeah. And I also think it's quite interesting that I think people maybe have a bit of a misconception about actually what it is. So when we haven't done anything before, or we're new to something, it's really normal to get self-doubt. Yeah. And it impacts our confidence. And we think because we feeling a little bit not very confident, or we've got a bit of self-doubt, we think it's imposter syndrome. And the real terminology of imposter syndrome is it's a consistent that's happened to you pretty much throughout your life in whichever jobs you've gone in. So I think, like with any definitions and badges, we can sometimes take them on board and kind of go, well, actually, is this just normal self-doubt, or is this something that's been with me a long time?
I think that's really important to say that, isn't it? Because always on this podcast, particularly, I'm helping people understand a bit more about their minds. And if you're in a new situation, or a situation that last time was difficult, you are going to be having some thoughts. Your mind might be screaming at you saying, don't do it, or you're not going to be able to do it. And it's normal, isn't it? And that's what we're saying to start with.
Yeah, and I also think as well, if we've never done something before, the brain hasn't got a plan, has it? Kind of goes to our little memory box and goes, wow, I've never done that before, so I can't, and so then we make up a great story about why we can't do it. So that's one of the questions I always ask when someone comes up against something that they've never done, is like, well, what's the plan? I don't know.
Yeah. So brilliant. So our first starting point is to remember that if it's something different, something new, or maybe something that was difficult in the past, there is going to be some level of questioning, doubt, uncertainty. So we can look at how we can manage that.
But I think then we can move into the sort of deeper side of imposter syndrome and what it actually is and how it plays out. Because in my work, I see it play out in different ways. Some people are perfectionists, they never complete, never feel happy about completing something. Some people sort of live in that overwork place where they feel inadequate, so they just do more and more and more and more. Some people have that idea about goals and setting goals that are the bar's just like up here somewhere, almost unachievable. Or maybe they just feel like they've got to find out absolutely everything so that they are an expert.
Yeah, I think we're, as human beings as well, we're really uncomfortable not being in control. I mean, we only have to look at the pandemic, don't we, to kind of go, we weren't really in control. Things happen, don't they, that have never happened before. So, but I think that's another driver, isn't it? Being in control. So, and that overwork and perfectionism, can't make a mistake. And what will people think? Those kind of shame drivers, if you like.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm always pushing people to think about is some of those behaviours don't have to be a problem. If you like things to be done well, it's not a problem. But what we're looking for is when it's out of that reach, or I often use the word almost disabling, so your need for perfection becomes disabling. Your need to overwork because you feel inadequate becomes a disabling feature. And I think for me, it's how you identify how far you've kind of gone or you're going.
Yeah, and I sometimes as well in my work, I kind of hear that people are trying to prove themselves and prove that I'm worth it in this job. I'm proving that. And I'm like, well, simply by the fact you've got the job.
Yeah.
They'll come up with 300 reasons why they, perhaps no one applied, or, perhaps, who knows why they got the job. And I said, well, have you ever thought that it might be because you're skilled and you've got the experience? Maybe they hadn't thought about that. So again, I think just simply talking about it, sometimes people can't get a perspective, can they?
Yeah. And again, when you're feeling emotional about something, we know, and I'm often talking about it on this show, you won't see the logic, you won't see the truth in it. And that's where the mind doesn't make up a load of things. I love that analogy, maybe nobody else applied. That's chances of that are zero, aren't they? You got the job because you deserved it, or you are what they're looking for.
I had somebody with a similar conversation, and I just remember saying to him, do you really think they'd put you in charge as the finance director if you didn't really know what you were doing with, like, a £3 million budget? Do you really think that they'd do that? And there was like this silence, and he went, suppose not.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting strategy, isn't it, that we can offer for anyone who does identify with this, is fact from feeling. So often when we do mention it to somebody else, they will ask a question that will help you identify the truth. Or you can do that yourself. Sometimes it's just actually writing down that thought and then looking at it. What's the fact in here? What's against the feeling?
Yeah, I love that strategy, Alison, the writing it down, and I write it down and then read it back, and ask yourself, is that true? What are you assuming here? Where's the evidence? If we were in a court of law, where's the evidence? And you can it's kind of funny, isn't it? They get to number 5, and then they go, really?
Yeah.
So there's always evidence, isn't there? So.
Definitely. So really thinking about what it is that you're thinking or you're saying to yourself, and then find some fact. Is there any evidence to say that is true? Because the chances are it won't be. And I think just being able to get out of your head and out of that feeling that you've got, or that thing that you've made up, is so
absolutely
important.
I think also another great strategy I use is as a way to get perspective, is that remember it almost like creating a little character for your imposter syndrome, so it absolutely separates you from you. And a really great way to do that is use your own name. So come on, Denise.
Yeah.
Like, and so what, what would you do here? And actually, give your imposter syndrome a name. So what does it need right now? Generally, it's coming from a place of fear. And what do you need to take care of it? So, and it's just a great little way, isn't it, to separate that out from you?
Definitely. I love that. And I think something else that springs to my mind is if that voice isn't even yours. So while you can be talking to Denise and saying, come on, is this true? Maybe worth checking whose voice it is. Because I know for me, some of my imposter used to not be my voice at all. It was definitely somebody else who was a doubter of mine, who would put me down and say, you're not good enough. And actually that voice, some of those things that I was thinking, they weren't even anything to do with me. They were definitely things that had been said to me in the past.
Absolutely. I worked with someone who her imposter syndrome had started at school, really. She was quite very intelligent and very quiet. And actually that was perceived. She was told that she wasn't very confident, and she was absolutely confident, but she was just quiet. But actually had grown up with that. So that manifested into some sort of monster. And she used to sing in a choir, and I remember saying, so when you're on the stage in front of 3,000 people, which part of you doesn't feel successful?
Wow.
And then actually being able to, oh gosh, actually I know where this has come from now. So again, there's the evidence, isn't it? And we bring stuff with us on our journey, don't we, from our kind of younger years into our more mature.
We do. And I think just identifying who is it, how old do you feel when you're feeling and thinking this thing is another good question to ask yourself.
Yeah, love that. Absolutely love it. It's kind of like the younger self, isn't it? Somewhere, I love that. So
yeah.
And that's another great strategy, isn't it? To help you get perspective, actually. And how old are you now?
Yeah, because you're just challenging, aren't you, in the moment? You're just challenging this feeling, this feeling that an imposter is in your midst right now, because that imposter is going to be telling you things like, you're going to get found out. Somebody's going to realize that you're not good enough. Somebody's going to tell you that, how on earth did you get here? And these thoughts, we can start to maybe write them down, see whose voice it is, see how old you feel. And as you say, if you can identify a time in your life, then it's like, oh, okay, that's why that's there.
Yeah, I think a lot of another great strategy, and I think, and this is something certainly, I think this has really personally helped me over the last number of years, is being more self-compassionate. Like, would you talk to your best friend like that?
Yeah.
Would you really? You wouldn't have any friends, it's kind of, so what is it that makes us talk to ourselves like that really harsh critic voice? So what would be a more compassionate voice, like particularly when you're in struggle? And sometimes things happen, don't they, and we don't really have any control over. We get a disappointment in our work life, and then we think, oh well, yeah, I'm not good enough. And actually it's how we process those things and move through them. Yeah,
I love that. It's so important. The self-care, the sort of be kinder to yourself, because I think that plays out in just so many scenarios for people when it's going a bit wrong or a bit tough, and they forget that actually they just need to think about that. But I think something that I've been talking to somebody about recently, a client of mine, and she remembers very young and a school situation, and she was left out of a friendship group, and for her, pushing herself, working so hard for fear of that happening again. And here she is now as a young woman who still can feel this old feeling of being young and being left out with her friends and terrified of it happening again. So then she overcomplicates things, overthinks things, creates the scenarios for herself that are not kind to herself whatsoever.
And I work a lot. I do a lot of work in the academic world, and hugely successful people got worked really, really hard. So real high achievers from a very young age. And when we've done some coaching, really kind of dug underneath, it's been very much around a fear of if I stop working so hard, I'm not going to be successful. And actually really challenging that and going, have you ever failed? Well, no, I haven't failed.
Yeah.
So it's actually, what does enough look like?
I think all of that as well, it's that, as you say, good enough. How can you allow something to go out that's, maybe isn't as perfect as you wanted it to be? And what might that feel like if you could do that? I think acknowledging that's enough, that's good enough, or acknowledging the success of however far you've got it, I think is another great strategy.
Yeah. And actually one of my rules of life is that sometimes we're going to make a mistake.
Yeah. I always think it's not just my saying, but it's definitely one I live by is, it's just information. If it hasn't worked out, you've just got more information. You just know now a bit more about that, or, how, and I think the other thing that people often find themselves doing, again, it plays into this idea that you're on your own, is that you make up that somebody else is going to think like you about your work, is going to think it's not good enough, think it's not perfect enough, think it's not good, brilliant enough. And actually 9 times out of 10, most people are going to be like, that's brilliant, well done.
Yeah.
So we feel alone with it, don't we? And having the courage to say, do you know what, I'm going to send it and get some feedback is so much more useful, because most people are going to say it's just what we wanted.
Yeah. And the other thing as well, I think, again, if imposter syndrome tends to be our friend, we're not very good at taking in compliments. I always say compliments are like a gift. Oh no, that we bat it off. Oh no, well, even like the simple thing about, oh, you look nice in that dress. Oh, this old thing, I got it from, and I always say another little technique is just say thank you, even if it's really uncomfortable. If someone was giving you a gift, you wouldn't give it back or throw it back, would you? Yeah. So I actually think that really helps build that muscle of self-worth, really, that I am good enough. So, and it can just feel a bit uncomfortable,
but it is a gift, as you said. It is strengthening your self-worth muscle, your confidence muscle, just to being able to say, if somebody says that's really good, just be able to say thank you. And I know lots of people, as I'm sure you do, who find that hard, but once you do it, then it gets easier, and then you're building up internally that self-confidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think something else that I see as a strategy that works quite well in these kind of situations is saying yes to things. Because if you are somebody who does lots of what if thinking, worries about, is it going to be the right decision? Is it the right, overthinking, worried that it's not going to be perfect, worried that you don't know how to do something, which, as we said at the beginning, the chances are you're going to feel a bit worried because it's new. But actually just having the courage to say yes to opportunities is a way of coping with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say yes and then work out the how later. Yeah. Even if you're mildly terrified.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? We fear that emotional response of fear. We fear being frightened, don't we? We fear being worried about something. And yet it's perfectly kind of normal, and it's part of our makeup, really.
Yeah, well, you know this more than anyone about going out your comfort zone. I mean, of all the people, I know you're the first one to say, yes, I'll have a go at that, and not done stuff before. I just had 4 days in Iceland and spent most of the time mildly terrified on a snowmobile or snorkeling. But actually, I am a bit of a wuss. And it was really interesting what that did for my confidence. And actually, I can't, was I the best at it? No, but I had to go. And actually, it was so empowering to do that, because I could have been quite easily talked out of it. So it was another friend who'd kind of booked before I'd kind of said yes. And she said, well, I just thought you'd do that anyway. So I was like, oh, okay. So And that's opened the door to other things that I've thought, as you absolutely said. So just say yes.
Just do it.
Have a go. What's the worst thing that can happen? So
exactly. Right, brilliant. So let's have a little summary of our signs that we've kind of identified today. So I think one of the really good things that you said, Denise, was that people often just think that they got lucky, that their success is just because they got lucky. They didn't actually do anything to achieve that. So I think that's the first thing we can highlight. Definitely they're convinced that they're not good enough, or it's not good enough. That's another good point. Something else you said, Denise, I think, which is great, is it's quite hard to accept praise. So again, if we're going to flip it into a strategy, being able to say thank you when someone says something nice. Apologizing.
Yeah, that's another one, isn't it? Yeah.
Just saying sorry all the time when you don't need to unnecessarily. We know that sometimes it's the standard that you set yourself is so high that you almost can't achieve it, so that you are going to almost fulfill your own doubt and fear because the standard you've set is way up here. And I think the last one for me is remembering that fear of failure can be so paralyzing. It'll stop you moving forward. Yeah.
I think for me, it's know that you're good enough, right? Simply as you are. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just know that you're good enough.
Definitely. I mean, that's a summary for so many challenges that we as humans have, isn't it? Is to just find a way, find the how for you, for being able to do that. And to do that, we need to do things like we've said, be kinder to yourself, acknowledge your successes, get that fact and feeling with some of these thoughts, always remembering that you're not alone. There's so many people. And just say yes. And I love your story, and hopefully somebody else. I've recently said yes to something that's going to be pushing me out of my comfort zone. So yeah, if you can, your brain might be screaming at you saying, "Don't do it, don't do it." Your imposter could be saying you can't, but it's just maybe jotting it down, challenge it, talk to somebody else about it, and then let's see if we can make it just lessen ever so slightly. And then slowly but surely, we know that it lessens so much that it doesn't become a thing.
Absolutely. Build your muscle, build your resilience muscle.
Yeah. Well, I always think it's like going to the gym, isn't it? We have to go regularly. We have to go repetitively. We've got to do all sorts of exercises to get fit. It's no different, is it?
No. Now you're punishing me now. I'm like going, I haven't been for 2 weeks. So maybe I've just started doing some workouts, and when you're kind of going, I haven't quite got into the habit yet, so I might go tonight. Now you've shamed me into it.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with me and having this brilliant conversation. I know it's going to help people, but before we go, tell everyone where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on my website, which is www.denisechilton.co.uk, and that's probably the easiest way. And there's a little contact email, so take a look on the site, and if not, they can contact me through you. So
exactly, and we'll put some of your details in the show notes anyway, put some of your socials and things like that. So if anyone wants to check Denise out, please do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time, Denise, today. I knew that this topic was best served with someone like you.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to say that in next week's episode, we are going to be talking about the power of the breath and how it affects your sleep. It's an absolutely fascinating interview, and my special guest is Joel Jensen. So I can't wait to share that with you.
Thank you for listening and sharing in this episode of Mental Wealth. Remember, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. My last question to you is, what is the one small thing that you can take action on from this episode? Message me on Instagram or through our website with questions you'd like me to explore. You'll find the links in the show notes. I'll be back with more tools and tips to make sense of your mind in the next episode. In the meantime, be kind to yourself. Bye for now.